Hello, I'm Derek Coburn with LumenCache, and today I want to show you start to finish installing an entire system and just how fast and easy it is. So let's start off with an enclosure. Now on the side there are knockouts. I haven't pulled them out for this demonstration, but just to kind of give you all an idea of how quick and easy this is. A little bit of safety first, duct tape, so this doesn't fall down on us. Now we're going to start off with AC to DC power supply. This one is a 600 watt power supply. It's fanless, efficient. Careful on the AC input side. The DC input side, no problem. There's two negatives and two positive connectors on the outside here, so the next piece we're going to connect is the fuse block. Now the fuse harnesses come pre-made from us, much easier than building it yourself, although the instructions are online for that. The two most important pieces on this are right here. These little bus bars connect all of the positive together on the input side and all the negatives together on the PDM side. Let's get into what PDMs are, power distribution modules. So a power distribution module is this piece, and it has a bunch of connectors on it for the RJ45 jacks, and there's sockets up on top where you can connect in the driver modules that are going to power the lights or read the information from the switches. So let's install this. Now there's 4 locations that you can install the PDMs. Just simply pop in the little plastic rivets here, pull them out a little bit, put the PDM in place, and just pop it down. Now the power supply, you don't want to screw it in just yet, but you can place it in the bottom of the enclosure and get it ready. Make sure that you got the AC power already connected onto it and the cord's ready to go, but don't plug it in yet. Safety first and everything. Now the fuse blocks are ready to go. They've got the short wires here that are going to connect into the AC-DC power supply, and the longer wires, usually there's 3 sets attached, are going to connect to the PDMs. If you're not using that many PDMs, just disconnect the extra wires, or make sure that you cap off the positive or negative wires so that there's no shorts. Now I'm just going to plug in the positive and negative wires. The red is positive, the black is negative, and just make sure the polarity is correct. Now on the PDM side, again, double check that the polarity is correct when you're connecting in the wires coming from the fuse block. It's actually easier to do this with the PDM outside of the enclosure, because you can just plug everything in, make sure there's no little whiskers sticking out, and tighten the screws here. By the way, you usually have to back out the screws first. Okay, everything's good to go. Pop it back in place. Snap the rivets in and duct tape. Just keep things tidy. When you're installing LumenCache, the biggest difference is the type of wire. We use Cat5 wire instead of using the big heavy copper Romex wire. And even though the typical home is about 2 times the wire length, it's actually significantly less copper and significantly less cost. An average home is about $850 in copper savings alone using LumenCache. But the most important thing you should do is know how to tip the wires, first of all. You've got to have the crimper tools, and you should be able to tip them in 60 seconds or less. But most importantly, you've got to test each wire. For that reason, we provide in every single dealer kit one of these digital testers. And these testers will allow you to get a wire map and a length, but don't trust your intuition. Even though you feel like, yeah, I nailed that one, I know there's no problems with the wire, test every single wire. It's really important. After you've run all of your rough in and you've got your wires tipped, marked, ready to go, they're all going to be terminating back at the panel here. And they're all going to plug into one of these RJ45 jacks right here. The order can be organized or it can be disorganized. You'd be surprised at how flexible the system is. Obviously it makes sense to follow a design, and we're going to go through design tools later on. But the trick is, plug all the wires in here to the ports, and then out in the field you're going to do the same thing by connecting up the Cat5 into the light. So for the most part, all you've got to do is just take the wire down from the ceiling, plug it in, and that's it. So now that the enclosure is ready to go, let's power it up and test some things out, huh? This little module is called the accessory power module. And what it does is it provides 12 volt power to any smart device in the system. That means that the switch controllers or a touchpad or a sensor that's out in the field all get its 12 volt power from here, regardless of the voltage of the power coming into the PDM. Now, we haven't powered this up yet because we haven't closed the fuse, so let's close the fuse here. And then we're going to plug in our accessory power module. It fits right here in the center. And when you plug it in, you're going to notice that you've got a solid green light right there. That indicator light means that we've got main power coming into the PDM, and now we can start plugging things in. It's actually okay to do it hot. Now, LumenCache lights come in many varieties, but they all have one thing in common. And that is that the LED driver that's usually on the inside of the light is separate. And the LED driver is quite a bit smaller than the AC versions. So we're going to take this piece and stick it into the PDM in one of the sockets. So up top here, there's an orientation. Make sure it goes in correctly. So right now in port number 1, I've got an LED driver, and I happen to have an LED light in my hand here. So my Cat5, I'm just going to connect the LED light. And then over here in port number 1, I'm going to plug in the Cat5. Now it's not turned on yet because there's nothing telling the driver to turn on. So we need switching. Let's get to that. Now wall switches in LumenCache are a little bit different. Of course, they look the same on the outside, but on the back, it just has an RJ45 connector. And in fact, this is one of the dumbest pieces of the system. Well, it's kind of elegantly smart, but there's no electronics inside it. The actual smarts occur in this piece. This is a dimming module. It listens to the signal coming from the switch. So you're just going to take your Cat5 wire that goes out to your wall switch, and you're going to plug that into the back of the switch. If you want to do 3 ways and 4 ways, just keep daisy chaining them along. Or you can star them together. It doesn't matter the configuration. It's very easy to plug all these things in, and you don't need to worry about traveler wires or different types of switches like 1 ways, 2 ways, 3 ways, etc. Now, back in the PDM, we need to plug the dimming module in. And the dimming module, again, it's going to listen to the wall switches, and it's going to create what's called a channel. And I'll get into that in just a second. So I have my driver module going to the Cat5 connected in port 1, and in port 4 I have a light switch connected. So I need to put my dimming module into the socket for port 4. Now all I got to do is hit the light switch and it turns on. Top is always on, bottom is always off. So you don't have to worry about turning a light switch upside down or not. Top is always on, bottom is always off. If you're using a dimming module, when you hold the bottom, it's going to dim, and if you hold the top, it'll raise again. If you turn it off and you turn it back on, it comes back to the dim level. If you tap it again, it goes full. Very intuitive system, and actually, once it's running, it doesn't need the signals anymore from the light switch. So there's a little hint if you might be using this to troubleshoot that you can kind of hot plug things like this, because there's actually no power going through the light switch itself. Now if you're asking, why do I have to run a separate wire out to the light switch? Well, you don't. You can actually take the light switch wire, and when you run up to the light, just connect into the other jack in there and then run down to the light switch. So you've got one wire that comes from the PDM into the room, and then you have a wire that goes down to the light switch. And what you'll do is back at the panel, you're going to put the dimming module underneath. So you'll plug the dimming module in because it's reading the switch, and then the driver is powering the light. And those two things can happen over the same wire. So by stacking those two pieces together, we actually have the same result of being able to turn the light on and off. And that's how fast it was to change the configuration of the system too. Now, of course, rooms have more than one light usually, so we just need an additional driver and light for each one of those new lights. Now, we also need a separate Cat5, so let's just plug that in right now. I'm going to plug in the driver. I'm going to plug in the Cat5, making sure that I've got the port correct. Now the wire is going to go through some path until it gets out to the light. And at the light, we're just going to plug it in. This is a different style of light, but they all basically work the same way. And just going to plug it in like that. Now, again, if I turn the light switch on, poof, both lights work together. And you can continue this process for as many lights as you need, up to about 64, because you can have 64 lights ganged together in a single panel. If you need more than 64 lights, all driven by the same zone of lighting, controlled by that dimming module, you can have another enclosure, tie them together, and then connect them through the protocol, where the dimming modules are actually talking to each other and synchronizing between different zones of lights. Now, without diving down into the weeds, as far as when we say flexible, LumenCache is very flexible. So let's take a look at some of the examples. Let's say you want to run 2 lights off of a single Cat5. You can do that, right? I'm going to turn my light circuit on here. As soon as I plug it in, I've got 1 light connected. Now, if I want to have 2, I can run those 2 LEDs in parallel as long as they are identical. So you can use a piece like this, which is handy because it's already got 1 male, 2 females on it ready to go. So you'll just kind of plug everything in. I'm going to plug the male side into the SIB, the smart interface block. I've got my first light connected. And then I'm just going to take my jumper that runs over to the second wire, second light. And there you go. 2 lights connected. Now, you probably noticed that the intensity dropped a little bit. These are actually getting half of the current as they were before. It's a very minor difference, as you can see, or barely see. Very slight difference because LEDs don't dim linearly. It's actually quite a bit more power to get more intensity out of them. So they're very bright at very low intensity, low current. But what's cool is as long as these 2 lights are within 30 feet of each other, and they're just connected up in parallel like this, these 2 lights will operate together just fine. You can go over to the driver and you can change the setting. You can see here there's little dip switches to change the current setting on the driver. So I can actually increase the current setting and get these lights back to their maximum output again, just by doing one little dip switch change. Now, we all know that good lighting design makes an enormous difference inside of homes and buildings. That's the difference between a meh house and a really wow house, right? So Lotus LED, for example, makes these beautiful small light accent lights. Each one is about 400 lumens on average. And it's so easy to connect these things because you can tie in the Cat5 that comes from the panel to the first light, and then you can daisy chain up to 4 more because these are only 11 volts each. And what that means is as you add up the string series, the voltage gets up to the maximum, but that means you can do 5 of them together. So let's take a look at how easy that is. So I've got my first one connected up here, and it's just tied into the light, so the driver automatically knows how to deal with the first light. But if we want to connect to the next one, we would have pre-wired already with our jumpers going over to the next light and the next light. So I'm going to go out of my first light into the second one where it says in, and then I can go out to the light switch. Now the light switch is ready to go, but if you notice only 1 light turned on, and the reason why is because there's this little jumper here and it says last LED. So when you pull out that last LED jumper, and then of course make sure it's in the last one here, that's going to complete the circuit. And by completing the circuit, each one of these LEDs are now connected, and they all receive the exact same current, so they'll always be at the exact same intensity. And of course, you can do the lighting, the dimming, I should say, all the same functionality. So it's really easy to tie multiple lights together in different configuration strings, etc. So the biggest question most builders ask is the last one. How do I use my own fixtures with bulbs? Let's get into that. So let's say you want to use your own style fixtures with this. Well, that's no problem. We have bulbs in different styles that are meant for DC power directly. And all you have to do is connect the black and white wires that are at the back of the fixture, the normally hot and neutral, and you're going to connect them to a SIB, a smart interface block. And the SIB is really just a connector between the RJ45 and the two conductor black and white wires. So let's do that now. We're just going to plug in our light. We're going to take our Cat5, plug it into the SIB, and we're going to turn the light on. And again, they have dimming, etc. So all these things are very easy to connect and tie together with LumenCache. When you want to have more bulbs, just remember that you're totaling the current together. So typically for a light fixture that has bulbs, you're going to want to run a Cat6 wire just in case. Now you're probably going to ask, what about strip lights? Strip lights are really popular and they're so easy with LumenCache. Just take the strip light, attach the SIB at the end. This is a different style of SIB. It's called a SIB K. It's very small, so it fits into a little enclosure box. Just plug it in. Now, the difference is that with strips and bulbs, I used a different type of driver. I used this SV driver. And the SV driver is switched voltage, which means it's just taking the voltage from the power supply and it's just turning it on and off based on the signal coming from the DM dimming module that got its signal from the light switch. Now the reason why we kind of separate the switches from the dimming module is because this truly is like a control system. But if you notice, for builders, it's as simple and as stupid as anything. You do not need an app to set up any of this. In fact, there's all kinds of configuration modes built right into the DM, and all you have to do is use that one little set button on it to change the modes. So it's very easy to use, very easy to set up, and it's also very fast. So I just said that's it, but that's not it at all. This is just the beginning. Think about it, if you're a builder and you've got this kind of flexibility and yet the same simplicity of the old style AC lighting, it really is a benefit to you and the buyer of the homes. I mean, all these different styles of lights, every one of them is just as easy as connecting in a Cat5. And if you notice, I did all of this live. It's very safe too. So the point is, you've got a much safer product, a much more flexible product. So let's just connect up a touchpad. It plugs in just exactly the same as a light switch, where you're just going to take it in the back, plug it in, and when you do, you'll see that it boots up, and at that point, touching the different zone areas gives you feedback. It also has a very, very gentle blue glow at night, just enough to be able to see it, not enough to annoy you or keep you awake. Now what happens with the touchpad is you can have up to 8 buttons at the DM. Again, the touchpad is not the smart part, it's the DM that's doing all the smarts. So you're just going to change the mode of the DM. In this case, it's got 5 flashes right now, indicating that it's in mode 5. 2, 3 pushes. Every time I push the button, it increases the mode by 1, so I now have 8 flashes, mode 8. There's many different modes inside the system, covering everything from on-off lights, top and bottom, non-dimming, dimming mode 5, which is the most common, and then mode 8, which is touchpad. What the dimming module is doing now is it's listening for which of the buttons you're pressing, and it's going to be able to act on its own channel to control the lights, but it can also send command signals out to all the other DMs so that they can participate in scenes. And that's how easy it is to do scenes, just by using this little set button here. The instructions on how to follow for setting up scenes inside the DMs are available on the website. Now, what would a controlled lighting system be without controls? So, even though a builder can install this very simple and reliable system, it's as reliable as the dumb AC light switches that you've been using for decades. But the difference between LumenCache and other systems is that you can add one piece, the gateway, and now you can remotely control all of the lights and devices. So let's see how fast it is to transform our simple LumenCache system into a complete control system. What we're going to do is plug in the gateway module, take this piece, plug it in the top port here of the PDM, and it just magnetically attaches to the top of the enclosure like that. Plug in your Ethernet port and it can be found on your phone. It's as easy as that. So many of you have been saying, okay, Derek, this is great, but you've shown me all small lights. I mean, what happens if I have an office space or something like that? There's no difference. In fact, all the lighting you've been seeing here has been done by these big 2x4, I don't know if you can see it, panels, but very easy, you see? Just take the Cat5, plug it in the back, and there's all your light. So commercial buildings, homes, schools, hospitals, dormitories, any list you can think of. We don't do bridges, tunnels so well, outdoor street lights, facade lights on buildings, no problem. But anything up to 50 watts per fixture. Now remember, with the high efficiency of LEDs, you can get very bright and efficient lights. So the LumenCache lights tend to be a little bit more efficient than average because we don't have to worry about the heat of the driver and the LEDs being all in one place. The drivers are back here in the panel and not in the fixtures themselves. So even if a light fixture driver were to fail, you just go into the closet, pop it out, pop a new one in, and the light turns back on again. So it really is more efficient as far as every facet, whether it's from copper costs, running the wires, terminating and startup, commissioning, the servicing of the system. All the pieces are a better value with LumenCache. So we've covered wall enclosures, we've covered the power supplies, we covered wall wiring harnesses. We also went through the power distribution modules and how you should never connect them into AC power directly. We talked about the ports that are connecting the RJ45 to the Cat5 wires and the sockets where you're going to plug in all of the drivers and control modules, and how each port has an associated socket connected to it as it goes across all 16. So we're seeing that here. And the last thing, and the most important thing that oftentimes people get hung up on, is channels. And channels are used to group zones of lights together. There's 16 potential channels per PDM, and they're simply selected by a little jumper. So you can put the jumper into positions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way through 8 by having it on the center to the left pin. And channels 9 through 16 are selected by jumpering from the center to the right pin. Now, the way that they create a signal is that a switch, again, sends a signal to the DM, dimming module. Then the dimming module is going to create a channel. So you have a choice of which channel you want to put that signal into. So let's say channel 1. Now, any drivers that are also connected to channel 1 and their sockets are going to be controlled by that dimming module. So it's kind of like a CB radio. You got 16 different channels, only one DM can talk at the same time, but many drivers can be listening to that command. And that creates a zone of lights. So let's say we've got, same thing here, we've got channel 1 going from a DM to a driver controlling the light. And then here we have another switch in DM on channel 5, and it's going to 3 different sockets, each one having channel 5 selected, and each one of those has a driver with 2 lights on it. And that creates 2 different zones of lighting. Again, channel 1 is in one zone and channel 5 is controlling the other zone. Now, when you have a driver stacked on top of a controller like the picture here, then those are on the same channel. But you can also, by putting a channel number in, you can have it go to other sockets and they can listen to it here. So for example, you've got, let's say, 2 sconces that are both being powered by the SVs, or 2 sets of strip lights. You can also have no channel. And basically no channel means that there's no jumper in, or that the jumper is just sitting in the middle somewhere. And this is oftentimes handy when you have a switch and a light on the same Cat5 wire connected to the same port, and that light doesn't need to control any other lights. In other words, it's only the one Cat5 coming out of the PDM, and that completes the zone, including having its switch underneath. So it's also a convenient way to just store the drivers. So contact us to get a hold of your dealer kit and start installing.